Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching our live stream. We've been doing this now for a few months, since the beginning of June. And right now we are in the middle of a 3-week special session focusing on the equity challenge with the United Way of Greater Ottawa County. So LEDA is conducting these conversations in order to, number one, have people's voices get heard that don't usually get heard, and also to get information out into the different communities and into our different audiences of people who they may not ordinarily hear from, and information that would be worth for them to take a closer look at. The United Way Equity Challenge is one example. So I'm bringing Liz De La Luz from the United Way and also Robyn Afrik from the Ottawa County DE&I office. Great. So Liz, can you tell us a little bit really briefly about the challenge, and is it too late to sign up for that?
No, it's not too late to sign up for the 21-day equity challenge. You can go to United Way's website, www.ottawaunitedway.org, and you can still sign up for it. You won't be able to get the past days, but from the day that you sign up, so the next day and the days until the end of the 21-day equity challenge. So yeah, I'd still encourage people to sign up for it. The last time I heard, we were over 800 individuals in Ottawa County that had signed up for it, which is really great, but we'd love to have more.
Great. So let's dive right into the sessions. So day 7 was how racism impacts Ottawa County, and part of the basis for understanding that is an ALICE report. Liz, can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. I'm going to show everyone. So we have this great report that we put together for ALICE. It's called the 2019 ALICE Project for just Ottawa County. There is one for Michigan, but we created one for Ottawa County specifically. Again, you can find that on our website. But ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And I'm just going to read the paragraph, the second paragraph of Patrick's introduction, because I think it pretty much sums it up. It's a population we all know well. ALICE is a person who works hard to make a living, but still can't seem to make ends meet. ALICE has an income above the federal poverty level, but struggles to afford basic household necessities. ALICE is a mother struggling to raise her children while also caring for aging parent. ALICE is a college student attending classes by day and waiting tables by night. ALICE is a senior citizen choosing between prescription medication and groceries. Currently, 31% of the people in Ottawa County are living below the ALICE threshold.
Great. Robyn, since you're with Ottawa County, can you sort of share with us a bit about what the ALICE report and how racism is focused within this county?
Well, I think obviously our county runs multiple numbers, and we have data sets that are done with our planning performance, and then we've also got our GIS mapping. One of the things that our office is going to be working on is what we call equity scorecards, and again, partnering with our GIS, we're looking at all the different demographics and how equity is throughout the different parts of our county. Where does it show up? And so I think Liz, we just kind of had a small conversation earlier, as we were looking through the material here, you had said, and I hope it's okay that I share this here, how the call out about racism or racism itself has not been noted in the material. Have you?
Yeah, and not necessarily in the ALICE data, but another assessment that was in the material, there wasn't. So, but can I just tell you guys about the New York Times article for this particular day? Right. I thought was really enlightening, and I'm not a real big heavy reader, which is, I know, a bad thing, but this article was absolutely amazing. It was the punishing the punishing reach of racism for Black boys. And it took 10,000 boys, and it basically is saying that white boys raised in wealthy families stay rich or in the upper class, but Black boys raised in similar will not. So there's a few different visuals that actually show you these little blue boxes and yellow boxes. They start out at a wealthy level, and then it shows you where they go as they become adults. And it's just amazing. 39% of the white boys are rich adults versus 17% Black. Upper middle class was 24% white, 19% Black. Poor, again, these individuals started out as rich, wealthy children. And for poor, it was 10% white became poor adults and 21% Black. So again, same situation, but very different outcomes. And that just blew me away. It blew me away. And then it shows you another visual where it is starting out poor throughout the system. And 31% of whites that started out poor, 31% stayed that way, while 48% of Blacks. 10% of those that started out poor actually made it to that rich adult, while only 2% of Blacks ever hit that. So I think that's something that really, really impacted me in going through this material, is just how they can be in similar situations. So it's not always about the color that you are, which I think is interesting. So last week we talked a lot about personal, whereas this week we're talking more about systematic racism or institutional racism.
Right. You know, Robyn.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you, Gloria. I just want
No. I was going to ask you if you had any comments about this.
So Liz, and I know we don't want to jump around a lot, but Liz, as you were sharing from that article, a couple things came to mind. One is hearing, right, those statistics and knowing the outcome from which they're projecting, saying that is true or it is true, and we interact with that reality every day. What do you think that does to our frameworks of individuals that we might encounter and the decisions that we make when we hear that?
Yeah, so that's hard because like I've gone through the other days, so I want to attach another day to this day. But I think the big thing is we all need a hand up at times, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to look at the systems that we have in place in order to help those that need help. I don't know if there's probably a better way of saying that, but that's just kind of what comes to my head.
You know, what I really focused on for this particular day was the number of households below the ALICE earnings threshold. So that even with ALICE, and I'm reading from this, deep disparities in racial equity exist. In the last 10 years, white ALICE families in Michigan have increased 1% compared to an 11% increase in Black ALICE households. And then I started looking at that. So 61% of the jobs in Michigan pay less than $20 an hour, while almost 2/3 of those jobs pay less than $15 an hour. So only 8% of jobs pay from $40 to $60 an hour, the high income, which means that, many families, in order just to survive, the adults have to work 2 jobs or more.
Right.
This is not just a dual earner household, but a having multiple jobs. So it's, to me, that was, it's really difficult because if you're an adult working all the time and you have, a family, how can you afford childcare? How are you able to spend time with your children and with the rest of your family? So, the quality of life isn't isn't it as good as someone would hope to be, because you're spending all your time working just to make ends meet. And I think this is an excellent example of why it's so important for us to understand what is going on within this county.
And Gloria, too, going back to the systems, right, which we had said.
Yes, right. So how about day 8, modern segregation in Michigan?
I gotta pull up my notes here.
So day 8, so last time around, Gloria, I think you had said something around redlining, and this day actually had an NPR video around redlining, and I thought that that was really impactful as well, and how that was set up. I guess I didn't really know the history around the Fair Housing Act and how redlining came about. So I thought it was really interesting to know that that was put in place. Those redlining, neighborhoods were put in place a long time ago, but how significant it is that they are still probably in the same spot that they were before, right? And a lot of those people that lived in that redlining were, so green was the best areas and the best people, and red was detrimental influences. So if you were foreign born, low class whites, or Negro, that's exactly what it said in there. Those were in the detrimental influence areas, which again, it's interesting. Like the green districts were this, and the were this, even just the colors, like the one day that we did if you took the test to see if they associated good words with a Black person or good words with a white person and how that actually worked. I kind of feel the same thing about this redlining history, is we have a long time ago, labels were put on people and places and things, and still to this day, things are still happening that way.
Right. I look a lot at history to figure out how did we get to where we are now. And when you look at schools being severely underfunded, food deserts where you don't have many grocery stores or fresh food available, healthcare where you don't have healthcare facilities, transportation where there's no public transportation. So all these, if you go back and look, these are neighborhoods that were redlined neighborhoods, and that was almost 100 years ago. Yeah. And just looking at that, how if you want to fix it, how do you do that in these neighborhoods that have really declined dramatically because of redlining? And I was doing a session on implicit bias to a group of fairly high-level professionals, and we were talking about redlining, and one of the people in there was a banker, and if you think about it, the reason redlining started is for banks to determine how to assess the risk, which is what they do. But unfortunately, it carried on in so many ways. They assessed the risk and they decided either not to loan or to loan at really high usurious prices. But because of redlining, then realtors started steering white, customers away from those neighborhoods, saying, "Oh, you don't want to live there because your property would be worth less." Things like that. So it just kept cascading and cascading. I mean, to me, that redlining is a huge contributor to the wealth gap, which we'll talk about shortly, and the inequities that so many BIPOC or people of Black, Indigenous, and people of color have, particularly living in these segregated neighborhoods.
Right. Yeah. And the article from The Economist that talked about segregation in America, I just wrote down, like, in the 1960s, the Civil Rights Act went through, Voting Rights Act went through, and the Fair Housing Act went through, right? So back then, 93% was not segregated, I think is how they said. It said, how are we segregated today? And it was 93% back then, and today it's 70%. And it's dropped since the 70s. So it's just, again, but we're not really getting any better. Like, this subject keeps getting talked about, but strides aren't being made. And why is,
Right.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a compounded effect, right, over time,
Right.
as you monitor your money. And so as you're peeling back specific layers, you're always doing it in comparison to whatever's leading, right, the said expectation of what it should be. So I do think, especially with LEDA, Gloria, as you're continuing to unpack some of these things with your training and helping our community and the leaders to see what those compounding effects are. But then as we're trying to make changes moving forward, what do we have to think about before we actually do that change?
Right. I mean, it took a long, long time to get to this point, like you said, Robyn, the compounding effect. So positive changes, unfortunately, aren't going to happen overnight. But then let's see if we can start compounding those positive changes the other way. So,
right.
yeah.
And I hope that people who are watching can I would love to see some of their comments and their reactions, or if they have questions or thoughts, would love to see that. So I don't want to forget that it's not just the three of us in these three little boxes, but there's a whole bunch of people that are watching, and I'd love to hear their comments. So we were talking about redlining. Let's talk about day 9 and housing inequities. Let's just keep moving through the days. And what I found intriguing about that, so this is kind of where we were talking about the housing needs assessment by Housing Next. It's a great assessment, and it evaluates the housing needs in Ottawa County, and it's recommending priorities and strategies for such housing. But the one thing that I kind of felt like is it didn't address necessarily the racial aspect of things.
Exactly.
So that's kind of, it's a great document, and it's a big document. And, it talks about, it does talk about some Alice things though too, right? Because it talks about some of the high priorities were high needs for rentals for low income seniors and families. Mm-hmm. So things that we're in desperate need of here in Ottawa County. Like, we're a great county to live in, but people can't find places to live. So we need that. Affordable housing for our workforce, and rentals and housing. And again, people come here to work, but then they leave our community. So all that, the monies that they're making, I think that it's leaving the county, right? Because they're going someplace else because they can't find things here. And then moderate and high-end moderate for sale housing as well. So that was something, those were the 3 things that came out of that. So Lynn has a question I just see, and it says, can you talk more about the role of leadership?
So a lot of this is, as Robyn was talking earlier about the compounding and how do we move forward. I think leadership, particularly, in this area that has so many committed leaders, by keeping the discussion going and then bringing in people in the appropriate subject matter experts, I think that together we can actually start putting some thoughts together and ways of driving positive change forward. Because I will assure you that we are starting to talk to each other and work together. But like I said, it took a long time to get to this point. It'll take a long time to start to get, moving forward. Now, there was a comment, Patrick Moran said, things tend to not stay in stasis. They are either getting better or worse. As a community, we can make positive change if we focus on it and work together, which is what we're really focusing on. And then Jen Mannion asked, how are we addressing the history of people of color being moved out of Holland city limits to low-income housing? We lose their diverse voices and their votes. To me, this is systemic racism. Does anyone care to comment on that, or just something that we need to make a note of and really look at?
Right. Yep. I think that that's true. And I don't know. I can't speak specifically to like the history of the city of Holland, but it does. Let's see. I can't speak to the history of the city of Holland, just because I haven't done a deep dive into that. But I think these are really great questions, and I think that they're really great questions for exactly what Lynn asked. How leadership is dealing with this. So I think these are really good questions to bring to some of those leaders that are helping to manage our city. So
Right.
Our mayor, our city council, the city manager. I think that these are questions that they need to start really looking at and addressing. And I think that they are trying to move things forward.
So let me remind everyone that this 3-week series is just part of our LEDA's ongoing weekly community conversation. So I'm going to make a note of that one in particular and have a session on housing in the future on that. So
that would be great.
Yeah.
Can I also say something as I'm reading some of these comments as well? First of all, Lynn, appreciate your question about the role of leadership. I think also maybe another thing to think about is not just the role of leadership itself, meaning leaders obviously give permissions, right, for or to stay in a certain space of what actions do we take, et cetera. But also it's important to understand what lenses are the leaderships looking through, choosing to make those decisions, right? And when it comes back to Patrick's conversation or his comment around, which I love, things are either getting better or worse, right? It's either an attribute or not with the default position. And agreed, I think as a community, yes, we do have to make positive change as we focus on it. And as always, the lens I always ask is, okay, so who is the community? When we say community, how are we defining that, right? Can't assume. And then when we talk about making positive changes, the lens that we ask always is according to who or for who. So I think those are some things that practices just to get in the habit of, because when we're in the same circles all the time, we sometimes think community and everyone's like, oh yeah, I know, I can name 5 people, but maybe that community might be to be also or including other people that have been there. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I think that's a great point. And Lynn said, thank you for that reminder about the lenses. That's so true. And again, at times I feel inadequate sitting at the table with the two of you, because the two of you do this for a living. And like I said, the last time around, this is not necessarily a new journey, but yet a new journey for me to educate myself, again, having come from, a small town, predominantly white community. And so, yes, I think that was an excellent point and an excellent reminder, Robyn. Thanks.
And
So
Liz, sorry, I want to just say this too, though, Liz. I am always learning. I mean, there's always something that's going on, intersectionality, things are switching up all the time. So even if I'm doing the work, I honestly am always trying to figure out, okay, what am I missing? And what I appreciate most about you, Liz, and your journey is that you're open and you're here and you're inputting, which is so needed. So thank you.
And I was going to remind everyone, because I didn't read this at the beginning, that everyone is unique, that no one speaks for all other people of their race or ethnic group. Invite a spirit of curiosity and for us to learn from each other as individuals with different experiences. I mean, that just states, thank you both Liz and Robyn for reminding us of that. So let's see. I wanted to briefly talk about, again, the housing inequity in your own backyard. I've been married for 35 years to a Black man. And every time we've gone to look for either a house or place to live, and in Michigan, whether it's on the east side of the state or this side of the state, he has never come with me. He has never gone to look until he actually gets to the point where we have to sign the papers. And because I'm Latina, but sometimes depending on, if I'm tan or not, people can sort of try and, ignore what I am because I'm fairly fair skinned. And I just didn't want that to be an issue when looking for a place. And that's been ingrained in me. And I don't think I'll ever get over that, It's something to think about, because there's some things you grow up with that you just sort of think about. If I want this house, I'm not going to let my husband see it until it's too late for the seller to back out.
Right. Yeah, that is, again, I go back to that first day about conversations that Black families have to have with their Black sons. Again, this is just another iteration of, what you do, what you've been ingrained with, and how you navigate that. So,
Right.
Gloria, would you say you still do that now, or
Yes, it's just because
wow.
well,
It's
if you
so
think about
hard
it,
because it's like it's a double-edged sword because it's like reinforcing
right,
the very thing that you're saying is not right. In order to get a different outcome, but at the same time, you're like, how do you?
Well, I always throw into the conversation how both my husband and I have advanced degrees and degrees from very prestigious universities. So people start getting a different viewpoint of us rather than just what they see. And and I also do that subtly so that when they finally meet him, it's like, oh, so this is the guy that's so highly educated as well and has a great job and all that, but he doesn't fit. If I saw him on the street, and this is, people's minds going, I wouldn't expect him to have those kind of attributes. So it's just, it's difficult because you're right. This is what I work on and help people work on. But yet when it comes to myself personally, in order to find a home.
Would you recommend that though for people now?
I think it's up to each person to do what they feel most comfortable with. But the thing I would recommend is if you are selling or renting your property, to look beyond what you see on the surface and look at the person and see that they just want to create a home for themselves and their families.
Mm-hmm.
I think the onus shouldn't just be on us. It should be on the homeowner or the landlords. So, yeah.
So can I move us on?
Yes, let's move on.
We're having a moment.
I know, because I'm just watching the time. So, racism affects health. So it was so funny because Robyn, you had sent out a link to the New York Times 1619 project, and I hadn't really taken a look at it. And then when I got to day 10, boom, there it is. It's like one of the first things that we see. And it takes you to episode 4, and it talks about how bad blood started. And it was 40 minutes, so it's a chunk of time, but it was well worth the listen. I just found it very enlightening in the fact that, like, we talk about how slaves and freedom and how they were freed and how wonderful that was. And yes, we did good work and stuff, but then you don't see the other side of it because our history books don't share that part of it, right? This project does. And it goes into how, yes, the slaves were freed, but they were given nothing. Like, see ya, off you go. They weren't given anything. And then, so in my head, I was like, well, gosh, when people are incarcerated and they're freed, they leave with a little something, right? But here, slaves were freed and they weren't given any resources whatsoever. There was no health care. The first health care program was created, but it was to a huge shortage of doctors, like that would help them. Like there was only like hundreds of doctors to help, or 100 plus doctors to help a population that was almost 1 million. So it was just really weird. I hadn't, like, again, enlightening information. When you go through the public schools, they talk about, slavery and emancipation, but they don't tell you the story, right? The like behind it. And they just say it's wonderful. We freed the slaves, but they weren't given anything. They were basically set up to fail. And, and it was funny because again, in there, they talked about how Blacks were dying. And at the time, the thought process was, well, that's just the natural selection. That's nature's taking its natural selection. And because, they're inferior. So therefore that's why it's happening, which is they were dying of things that could have been cured, and that white people weren't dying of those things. Why? Because they had the medicine for it. So, and then this went into a story about Rebecca Lee Crumple, who wrote this book. It was a medical book that was specifically for the Black community and for mothers and nurses to help take care of their population, because the hospitals weren't doing that, right? So it just, again, and it was the first time that universal care was talked about in I think it was 47 by President Truman. It was the first time that universal health care was talked about, but it got shot down.
So, I mean, racism affecting health is a huge, huge, huge topic. When you mentioned the book that Rebecca Crumple wrote, if you look at the statistics nowadays, you can see a much higher mortality rate of Black infants and also Black mothers compared to white infants or white mothers, and it still is prevalent to this day. There's been concerted efforts to try and reduce the incidence of infant and maternal mortalities, and it's starting to get better, but it's not at that level that it is with the entire population or white population as a whole. The other thing is attitudes in physicians. They don't really discuss racism in medical school because it's just based on the facts and on the data. But the perception is that many times, in history, the perception is that Black people experienced less pain, so they didn't need as much anesthesia, and there were other things like having medical experiments done on them without anesthesia, or injecting them with diseases in order to see how it progressed throughout the human body. So Black people were used as medical guinea pigs, really, to coin the phrase. So, and even nowadays, it's still because of lack of income, not having insurance or the appropriate insurance, or having lack of access to quality health care. There's still a lot of these issues that are still prevalent, not just among Black, but among other populations of color.
Yeah, and I know that didn't talk about it in the article, but food choice, right? And food and how we eat has a lot to do with it as well. And so speaking from personal experience, I know that I grew up eating a lot of rice and beans, hamburger if it was available, because we wanted to eat something that stuck with you. Like I didn't even.
Did your mother cook with my mother? Because that's.
I didn't even really know what spaghetti was, and what spaghetti was the little short noodles that were in the lunch at school with the tiny little meatballs and the stuff that they called spaghetti sauce, and it was just all mixed together. I didn't know that there were other options. I mean, but I think it is, again, if you're in, poverty, you find those things that are going to be easy or things that are going to stick with you. And those things are not usually healthy at all. So then if that's what you're eating, it just perpetuates what's going to eventually occur. My family has diabetes all over it. And for some reason, I thought I was special, that I would outrun diabetes and never, ever get it. But if I didn't change my eating habits, it's inevitable because just, of my makeup and stuff. So, but food has a lot to do with it too. And, not to brag or anything, but I dropped my A1C by 5 points.
Wow.
Just what I ate. And it was so surprising. And when I was in the midst of this huge push to get that A1C down, I went to our family Christmas dinner, and it's a potluck of all the wonderful Mexican food you could ever want. Looked at the layout, and I was like, seriously? Technically, I mean, you always kind of give yourself some cheat days, but technically there was nothing other than the salsa and the guacamole that I could eat, not even the chips, because those are carbs, right? So it is, when you talk about health, it is also talking about, what you're eating. And we're really fortunate here in West Michigan to be able to, have access to fresh fruit. But even if you go down the street, people don't necessarily think, oh, hey, the farmer's market is just a few blocks down. No, the convenience store is right there. So I'm just going to go there and I'm going to get something quick and easy because that's what I can do. Or if you go to the north side of the town, where we have our migrant populations, they're not going anywhere. So what are we doing to help, those ALICE populations that need that help?
Right. And I was going to ask you a question, Liz. You sort of talked a little bit around it, but in order to reduce your A1C, what kind of foods did you eat? And are those easily found in these populations?
Vegetables, lots of vegetables. Fresh
vegetables, not
anything. The crazy thing is I didn't eat a lot of vegetables when we were little, and when we did, it came out of a can.
Right.
My mom would boil the broccoli so much with mush. It wasn't nutritious at all. All of that was in the water that she threw away. But it is any kind of vegetable. My dietitian would tell me that I can eat up to 5+ servings of vegetables a day. So you can eat as many vegetables as you want, and you can substitute it. Last night I had, this is going way off topic, so I'm just going to stop.
No, but
whole road that I don't need to go.
But think about, and you alluded to it, the food deserts in all these different lower income populations where, like you said, the convenience store is right around the corner, but they don't always, have the fresh fruit, or if they do, it's sort of wilted. So it's not conducive to that. So let's move on to day 11, environmental racism. Talking about the Environmental Protection Agency finds that people of color are much more likely to live near polluters and breathe polluted air, even as the agency seeks to roll back regulations on pollution. I think that in Ottawa County, I'm not certain if we have any major areas of pollution. Robyn, can you answer that?
I have not done a lot of heavy research into that yet. I know that I'm partnering with some organizations that are really focused and tuned into this. So there's obviously the preventative side. There's the ones who are responding to some of that, which you may not see, but all of the elements are part of it. So I hope to have more information on that, but I don't want to say just because you don't see it, it's not there.
Right.
And if we ever get into, if there's any environmentalists on this call, they're probably just like chomping at the bit to say, hold on a minute, right?
Well, exactly. And if they're on a call, please
Right.
state so on comments. Yes.
Our planning, I mean, our parks, department, they obviously are dealing with all of this, right now, even the water quality forum, that's a reality, access to and where that's at. So, yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't give you a much deeper dive there, Gloria, but I don't want to miss.
But speaking of water quality, I mean, the big thing is Flint, in order to save a couple of bucks, decided to change water sources without realizing that how they did it, leached the lead out of the pipes into all these houses that, those children will be living with those issues the rest of their lives. And it took a lot of effort to be heard, because this was affecting populations of color, populations that don't have, anyone to speak out for them, that don't have political clout. These are just poor people. The water's bad, so what? Maybe it's just the pipes, but it was definitely a significant issue. So.
Yeah, there were lots of great, great videos like the TED Med for the pediatrician that was actually the whistleblower in Flint. She had a TikTok. And then there was another video that I watched. It was What is Environmental Racism? It's a great one. Environmental racism is the new Jim Crow. There were lots of really great articles and information around that. Not as much local stuff, but still, I think some really good information about what is going on in there. There was a lot about the Flint crisis and what U of M is doing to help, find those places of where the lead pipings are and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the most polluted zip code in Michigan is in Southeast Detroit, which is a very heavily Latino community where they have all of these, chemical plants and steel plants and everything going into the air, as well as in the soil, as well as particulates in the air. You think about people who live there who can't afford to move away, and the children growing up. No wonder their asthma is so significant, and that follows them throughout their life. And you think about it, having asthma is not a good thing if you get COVID, for example. So it affects you in so many different ways in the future.
Right.
We need to keep moving, because I think we're just about to the last day that we're going to cover today. Day 12, the racial wealth gap. I'll just read one statistic. Slaves in America were worth over $3 billion at the end of in the 1860s, which is now $83 billion in 2018 dollars. We're taught in school that the Civil War was to free slaves, but so much of the resistance, or actually major resistance in the South, was because slaves were their wealth, and it enabled them to really focus on creating wealth without having to pay someone. So that's I think I forget the first time I realized that, but it was way past high school, understanding, that's what the issues were in the Civil War. Because I can talk on and on about the racial wealth gap, but I'd like to give, Robyn.
Yeah, this isn't in the material, but there is a woman by the name of Katrina Brown who did a documentary called Traces of the Trade. And actually, I've worked with her and the producer on a couple projects nationally and locally. Traces of the Trade actually is about the largest slave-owning family in the North. And Katrina
I've seen that. Yes.
She's a direct descendant of that family. And what she did when her grandmother died is she broke open the entire slave trade. She looked at the books. She looked at where the sugar was routed. She saw how much money right inside that actual ledger was, like you said, what one person was worth. She watched how they were documented, not as people, but as product, right?
Mhm.
And so it caused certain leaders in their community at the time and business owners at the time to reframe their brain and say, well, this is how we're going to build our economic wealth, right? And what she did is she traced the entire trade that helped her family, who happened to obviously be white, stand up on where they are today. And so she's trying to make sure that this information is obviously shared. And it's not for anything other than to say, this is fact. Like, I was part of this, right? I'm not trying to push an agenda. This is just our family carried that legacy, and it's an important part of history.
Right.
So, I know in this study, they did have an article, which I thought was fascinating when they were sharing. I think one of the things they had said in here was white adults who don't graduate high school, don't get married before having children, and don't work full time still have much greater wealth at the median than comparable to Black and Latino adults. And that would be also Black and Latino households that have married, completed their education, or even worked longer hours. And of course, there's graphs that they break down in comparison to, the median income for individuals. For example, a median white high school dropout has similar wealth to the median Black adult who graduated high school and attended at least some college.
Right.
It's really wonderful to see the disparities, right?
I mean, talking about the racial wealth gap, and we talked a little bit about redlining, and for most people in the United States, their wealth is in their home and their home equity. But if you're not able to really get a home that appreciates in value, you don't build that wealth and that equity and able to pass that down to your children. So, some of those studies we're talking about, there was an article in there that was talking about, had several different comments, because people ask, okay, how are we going to close this racial wealth gap? Well, attending college does not close the racial wealth gap. Raising children in a two-parent household does not close the racial wealth gap. Working full-time does not close the racial wealth gap. Spending less does not close the racial wealth gap. And then when the same survey asked about reasons why Black people in our country may have a harder time getting ahead than whites, the majority of Black, white, and Latino Americans endorsed explanations such as lack of motivation to work hard and family instability. So putting it on the individual rather than focusing on the systemic racism that really has contributed to that. And so I think we also need to sort of reframe our thinking about, how people can really focus and get ahead if the system is set up in such a way that it's really difficult for them to overcome it.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to point out, too, if you guys haven't had the chance, on this particular day, there was a piece from Dr. Donna Beagle, and it's called Breaking the Cycle. And she talks about her own life experience, which I think is amazing. She comes from generational migrant population, and just her struggle. Like, she got married at the age of 16. She didn't know how to read and write like the majority of her family. She didn't learn how to read and write necessarily until she was 26. She got divorced. She got remarried. She didn't understand college. She went to community college. She had some help. She knew, I mean, it's just such a unique, an incredible story from my perspective. She talked about the fact that she went from that to I'm going to get my GED, to I'm going to go to community college, to I'm going to graduate from college. She's got her master's, she's gotten her PhD. And it's funny because at one point during her conversation, she talks about how she had to violate her own values. It's because when she got her financial aid money, her value was to, her brother's lights were getting shut off. Oh, let me help him. My mom needs milk. Oh, let me help her. And she didn't do those things because she knew that if she did, that they would stay in the same place that they were, right? So she violated her own values to try and think further ahead and how that could help. And just, I mean, her, like I said, her story is incredible. People, what does she say? We need to invest in our communities as a whole. And it's people do not cause poverty, but it's our systems around us. So she said, when people are talking about, racism in the wealth gap, they're not talking about affordable housing. They're not talking about a livable wage job or excellent schools for all, or healthcare for all, or childcare, or transportation. And we do have a childcare crisis. I mean, I think even in our community assessment, we've said, like, we have X number of even if we had X number of spots of daycare, we couldn't fill them because we don't have any place for them to go. So it just is really interesting, and just not everybody has the same chance at things. And I think that at some point is the bottom line, is we're not all on an equal playing field. And I think that's a big thing it's a big elephant in the room that needs to be talked about, is that we don't all start out at the same level. And kind of in reference to what Gloria was saying earlier, is that, white individuals who are living at poverty or below at some points have more wealth than people of color who have some college. And, why is that?
Robyn,
No,
do you want to wrap up before I'll give each of us a little wrap-up time?
No, I think for this series too, it was great to, I think, delve deeper into the systemic piece. I think that when we had talked prior, like, the material this week is really heavy, right? There's a lot of studies, a lot of understanding how things have been compounded and interplay with each other. So I think it's important that, as we talked about the first section, understand how systems affect us, and then moving to the third. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Liz?
Nope, I really appreciate the fact that we're talking about this. I hope that it starts some conversations, and people reflect internally on some of the things that they could maybe do differently.
Right, and my focus, as you know me, was always on that wealth gap. How do we minimize that? This started, the 1619 project. The reason it's called 1619 is that was when the first Black people were sold as slaves in the United States. So that's just over 400 years ago. So that's a 400-year history. You talk about redlining, that was in the 1930s. So that's 90 years. So it's taken a long time to all of a sudden realize the unintended consequences or intended consequences of these policies and these activities that happened so many years ago. Unfortunately, the change isn't going to be instantaneous, but we keep plugging away at it, compounding it the other way, as Robyn so eloquently stated, positive compounding. Hopefully we'll start making some changes and really, particularly, in this relatively small area of Ottawa County, you can actually start and actually having some positive impact on that. So thank you all.
Thank you.
So yeah, just do that. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to us, as well as watching us. Next week, we have two more special guests, along with Liz and Robyn. We're going to have Al Vanderberg, the Ottawa County Administrator, and Patrick Moran, the President of Greater Ottawa County United Way. So I invite you to please watch us. The links are available on each of our websites so that you can watch them or share them with your friends, family, colleagues, so that they can actually watch them at a time that's more convenient for them. So again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Take care.